The Apex Arena had consumed more sentient beings than most civilizations had ever produced, which was precisely the point. Built into the hollow core of a dead planet and powered by the screams of 10,000 different species, it represented the pinnacle of galactic entertainment, assuming one's definition of entertainment included watching beings tear each other apart, for the amusement of creatures who had long since evolved past the need for actual violence themselves. The arena's reputation preceded it across 17 star systems, whispered about in the kind of hushed tones typically reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. Champions entered with fanfare and left as nutritional paste, their atoms recycled into the very walls that would witness their successors' equally spectacular demises. The average career span of an arena combatant measured roughly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, though that statistic included the 30-second introduction period where competitors were still technically breathing. In the observation deck high above the killing floor, Administrator Vex-9 adjusted his third eye to focus on the latest batch of acquisition. The Zephyrian official possessed the kind of calculated cruelty that came from millennia of bureaucratic evolution, his species having perfected the art of inflicting suffering through proper channels and requisition form. Today's roster included the usual suspects: a berserker from the Crimson Nebula, whose species considered dismemberment a form of artistic expression, a crystalline entity that could reshape its molecular structure into any weapon imaginable, and something that appeared to be a walking nightmare made of teeth and poor life choices. Then there was the human. She sat in the holding cell with the kind of stillness that suggested either deep meditation or complete psychological breakdown. Her species had been discovered only recently, inhabiting a small blue world in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy, and their integration into galactic society had been about as smooth as a meteor impact. Humans, it seemed, had the unfortunate tendency to ask uncomfortable questions about established systems, and possessed an irritating habit of refusing to accept because that's how we've always done it, as adequate justification for anything. The young woman appeared utterly unremarkable by galactic standards. No natural armor plating, no venomous secretions, no ability to phase through solid matter or manipulate dark energy with her thought. She possessed 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head, a configuration so basic it bordered on insulting. Her species lacked the courtesy of even decent claws, instead sporting what could generously be called fingernails, but would more accurately be described as evolutionary afterthought. Another soft-world specimen, muttered Sub-Administrator Klaxon, his mandibles clicking with amusement. Look at it. No natural weapons, no defensive capabilities, no apparent survival instincts. It's not even trying to escape or plea for mercy. What kind of predator just sits there? Vex-9 consulted his holographic roster. The acquisition report classifies them as omnivorous pack hunters, with notable adaptability. Though I suspect our field agents were either intoxicated or suffering from solar radiation exposure when they filed that assessment. The human had been picked up during a routine cargo inspection, stowed away on a freighter bound for the Outer Rim. Her crime, illegal immigration, carried a sentence that could be served in the arena, assuming she survived long enough to technically complete it. The odds of this happening were approximately the same as a supernova occurring in reverse, but galactic law required they offer the option. Previous human specimens had provided minimal entertainment value. They tended to die quickly and without the kind of spectacular violence that kept the arena's subscription numbers healthy. The last one had simply laid down and refused to participate, which had been profoundly unsatisfying for everyone involved. The one before that had spent his final moments attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution with a creature that communicated exclusively through acts of violence. Perhaps this one will last longer than the others, suggested Klaxon, though his tone suggested he held little hope. The biometric scanners indicate elevated stress hormones but no signs of the complete terror response we typically observe. The arena floor below them was a masterpiece of adaptive architecture, capable of shifting between dozens of different environments and combat scenarios. Desert wastelands, urban ruins, volcanic landscapes, frozen tundra, each designed to favor different species and combat styles. The current configuration resembled a gladiatorial amphitheater, complete with weapon racks positioned at strategic intervals, and environmental hazards that activated on random timers. The reigning champion was a behemoth known as the Devourer of Worlds, though this title was somewhat misleading as it had actually only consumed 3 small moons and a space station. Still, its record of 47 consecutive victories spoke for itself, as did the collection of previous challengers' bones that decorated its personal quarters. The creature stood nearly 4 meters tall and possessed enough natural weaponry to outfit a small army, each victory only adding to its already impressive collection of scars and trophies. "Shall we begin the pre-combat ceremonies?" Dex 9 inquired, his fingers hovering over the control panel. The crowd grows restless, and the concession stands report optimal profit margins. The human finally moved, standing and walking to the bars of her cell. She didn't rattle them or demand answers or exhibit any of the typical behaviors associated with pre-combat stress. Instead, she simply observed the arena floor with the kind of analytical attention one might give to a particularly complex mathematical equation. "Curious," Claxon noted. "Most specimens at this stage are either catatonic with fear or driven to manic desperation. This one appears to be studying the environment." The transport tube activated with a mechanical whir, designed to deliver combatants directly to the arena floor in a manner that maximized dramatic effect while minimizing the possibility of escape. The human stepped into the tube without resistance, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts or intentions. "Perhaps she's simply accepted her fate," Dex 9 suggested, though something in the human's posture suggested otherwise. Her species does have a reputation for philosophical resignation in the face of impossible odds. The tube began its descent toward the arena floor, carrying its cargo toward what every statistical model, combat analysis algorithm and betting pool in the galaxy agreed would be a very brief and very violent conclusion. The crowd's roar grew louder as the transport approached the arena floor. Thousands of voices raised in anticipation of another spectacular demonstration of why humans had no business in the galaxy's most dangerous entertainment venue. The tube reached the bottom and opened with a pneumatic hiss, depositing the human onto the combat zone's sandy floor. She stepped out calmly, as if arriving at a social gathering rather than her own execution, and the massive portal sealed shut behind her with a finality that had concluded thousands of similar stories. Above, Dex 9 activated the arena's announcement system, his voice booming across the killing floor. "Let the combat commence." The human looked up at the observation deck, and for just a moment her expression suggested she understood exactly what was about to happen. Then she turned her attention to the arena around her, and something in her stance shifted from passive observation to active assessment. The Devourer of Worlds emerged from the opposite gate with all the subtlety of a solar flare, its roar shaking dust from the arena's ancient wall. It had never lost a match, never shown mercy, and never encountered anything it couldn't reduce to component atoms within the first few minutes of combat. The human watched it approach, and did something that had never been recorded in the arena's extensive archives. She smiled. The combat zone had seen its last predictable match. The arena floor possessed the kind of ambiance that interior decorators would describe as early apocalyptic, with subtle hints of impending doom. Sand mixed with the pulverized remains of countless previous combatants created a surface that crunched underfoot with the accumulated dreams and aspirations of beings who had once believed they might survive the experience. The human's first step onto this charnel ground produced a sound remarkably similar to walking on cereal, though significantly more ominous. The Devourer of Worlds approached with the confidence of a creature that had never encountered a problem it couldn't solve through the application of overwhelming violence. Its chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the arena's harsh lighting, each plate scarred by weapons that had failed to penetrate its natural armor. 4 arms ending in claws capable of shearing through starship hulls swayed rhythmically as it moved, while its primary mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among its species. The human, meanwhile, conducted what could only be described as a tactical assessment disguised as casual sightseeing. Her eyes tracked the weapon racks positioned around the arena's perimeter, noting their contents and accessibility. She observed the environmental hazards, pressure plates that triggered flame jets, sections of floor that could retract without warning, and automated defense turrets that activated on proximity sensors. Most importantly, she studied her opponent's movement patterns with the kind of attention typically reserved for doctoral dissertations. "Fascinating," Claxon noted from the observation deck. "The creature appears to be cataloging potential resources rather than exhibiting the standard pre-death panic response." The Devourer closed the distance with surprising speed for something the size of a small building, its roar shaking loose debris from the arena's upper level. This particular sound had been the last thing heard by 47 previous challengers, a statistic that would have been more impressive if any of them had lived to appreciate it. The human's response defied every predictive model in the arena's database. Instead of fleeing, freezing, or attempting to find the nearest exit, she moved laterally toward one of the weapon racks. Her gait suggested someone late for an appointment rather than someone about to be converted into biological paste. The first strike came with the force of a meteorite and the precision of a surgical laser. The devourer's primary claws swept through the space where the human had been standing, encountering nothing but air and the growing suspicion that this particular prey item might not follow the established script. The human had rolled beneath the strike with fluid efficiency, coming up beside the weapon rack and selecting what appeared to be a standard-issue plasma rifle. The weapon was designed for beings with 4 arms and redundant nervous systems, making it theoretically impossible for a human to operate effectively. The human apparently hadn't read the manual. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one striking the devourer's lower right arm joint with surgical precision. The creature's roar shifted from triumphant to annoyed, a sound reminiscent of a garbage disposal encountering an unexpected force. Its wounded limb hung uselessly, sparking with disrupted neural pathways. Remarkable aim, Vex 9 observed, his third eye dilating with interest. Though conventional weapons have limited effectiveness against the devourer's armor plating, the human seemed to reach the same conclusion, discarding the plasma rifle in favor of a gravitational disruptor that had been collecting dust since the previous Tuesday. This weapon required precise timing and an understanding of 3-dimensional physics that most species took decades to master. The human activated it on her first attempt, creating a localized gravity well that sent the devourer stumbling off balance. The crowd's roar diminished to a confused murmur. Arena combats typically followed predictable patterns. Challenger enters, displays brief moment of hope, gets systematically dismantled, becomes part of the floor's organic composition. This human appeared to be improvising an entirely different narrative. The devourer recovered with the kind of grace that came from millions of years of evolutionary optimization for violence. Its remaining functional arms lashed out in a pattern that should have reduced the human to constituent molecules. The attack would have been lethal to any previous challenger, all of whom had possessed the courtesy to stand still and accept their fate. The human, displaying a profound lack of respect for established traditions, wasn't there when the claws arrived. She had somehow repositioned herself behind the creature, armed with what appeared to be a maintenance tool she had acquired from somewhere in the arena's infrastructure. The improvised weapon, technically a plasma cutter designed for equipment repair, found the gap between the devourer's armor plates with disturbing accuracy. The resulting wound wasn't immediately fatal, but it was profoundly insulting. The devourer spun with surprising agility, its remaining arms creating a whirlwind of death that should have ended the encounter according to every combat simulation ever run. The human dropped to the arena floor and rolled between the creature's legs, a maneuver that would have been impossible for any being with a proper sense of dignity. She emerged behind the devourer again, this time carrying a thermal lance that had been mounted on the arena wall for decorative purposes. "She's using the environment," Claxon noted with growing amazement. "The arena's own infrastructure as a weapon." The thermal lance activated with a sound like reality being torn in half. The human wielded it with the kind of competence that suggested either extensive training or the kind of intuitive understanding that emerged from pure desperation. The weapon's energy beam carved a precise line across the devourer's back plating, creating a wound that glowed with molten metal. The creature's roar reached frequencies that shattered several observation windows and caused 3 spectators to experience temporary hearing loss. It spun again, faster this time, claws extended in a killing pattern that covered every possible angle of attack. The human had vanished. For a moment that stretched like taffy in a temporal anomaly, the arena fell silent. The devourer stood motionless, its sensory organs scanning for prey that had apparently achieved some form of localized invisibility. The crowd leaned forward collectively, searching for signs of the human's inevitable demise. She emerged from beneath the arena floor, having somehow accessed the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the combat zone. The thermal lance preceded her through the opening, its beams slicing upward through the devourer's lower abdomen with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of someone who had recently discovered the joy of problem-solving through applied violence. The devourer's expression, insofar as a chitinous nightmare could be said to possess facial expressions, shifted from confidence to confusion, to what could only be described as existential concern. The wound bisected several vital organs, and severed the neural pathways that controlled its lower extremities. The creature toppled backward with the kind of impact that registered on seismic sensors 3 systems away. Its death throes involved considerable thrashing and the emission of biological fluids that would require extensive cleaning protocols to remove from the arena floor. The human emerged fully from the maintenance tunnel, thermal lance still active, and surveyed her handiwork with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully assembled furniture without requiring the instruction manual. She deactivated the weapon and set it aside with the casual efficiency of a professional completing routine maintenance. The arena fell into a silence, so complete that individual spectators could hear their own cardiovascular systems operating. The devourer of worlds, undefeated champion, terror of 17 star systems, consumer of 3 moons and a space station, had been reduced to a cooling pile of biological matter by a creature that possessed no natural weapons, no armor plating, and no apparent understanding of how arena combat was supposed to function. The human looked up at the observation deck, her expression suggesting she was waiting for further instructions. When none came, she walked to the center of the arena floor and stood where every previous champion had claimed their victory. Above, Vex 9 stared at his instruments with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been subjected to vigorous revision. Every sensor reading, every biological marker, every combat analysis algorithm, insisted that what had just occurred was statistically impossible. The human raised her hand in what appeared to be a gesture of acknowledgement, though whether she was addressing the crowd, the officials, or simply indicating her readiness for whatever came next, remained unclear. The arena had witnessed its first genuine surprise in over 3 centuries, and somehow everyone present understood that this was merely the beginning. The arena's medical team arrived with the kind of efficiency that came from centuries of practice removing champion-sized corpses from the combat zone. They approached the Devourer's remains with equipment designed for hazardous waste disposal, a grim testament to the creature's final transition from apex predator to cleanup assignment. The human watched their work with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly thorough janitorial service. Vex 9's communication array erupted with incoming transmissions from betting houses, entertainment syndicates, and what appeared to be several academic institutions requesting permission to study the arena's security footage. The upset victory had generated more interest than the arena had seen since the infamous incident of the Screaming Nebula 3 decades prior, though that had involved actual cosmic phenomena rather than a single improbable biped. "Sir," Claxon's voice carried the strain of someone attempting to process information that violated several fundamental principles of reality. "The secondary combatants are refusing to enter the arena." The arena's standard protocol involved releasing multiple challengers simultaneously, creating a dynamic environment where survival depended on managing threats from multiple vectors. The remaining acquisitions, including the Berserker from the Crimson Nebula and the crystalline entity, observed the human's performance with the kind of attention typically reserved for natural disasters, and had reached the unanimous conclusion that discretion represented the better part of valor. Refused. Vex 9's third eye swiveled toward the holding cells where several of the galaxy's most distributors had doubly developed acute cases of stage fright. These are beings who consider dismemberment a recreational activity. The human, apparently unaware of the administrative crisis occurring above her, had begun a systematic exploration of the arena floor. She moved with the methodical precision of someone conducting a property inspection, examining weapon racks, environmental controls, and structural features with the kind of thoroughness that suggested long-term planning rather than short-term survival. Her investigation revealed several interesting features that previous combatants had been too busy dying to notice. Hidden panels in the arena walls contained emergency supplies, backup power systems, and what appeared to be a comprehensive database of arena operation. The human accessed these systems with the casual efficiency of someone who had spent considerable time understanding how things worked rather than simply accepting that they did. "She's mapping the facility," Claxon observed with growing amazement. "Not just the combat zone, but the entire infrastructure." The crystalline entity, when finally convinced to enter the arena through a combination of contractual obligations and electrical motivation, lasted approximately 47 seconds. Its ability to reshape its molecular structure into various weapon configurations proved ineffective against an opponent who had apparently memorized every environmental hazard in the arena and possessed an uncanny ability to predict movement patterns. The Heen's victory involved the creative use of a gravity manipulation device, 3 different automated defense systems, and what could only be described as aggressive problem-solving. The crystalline being's defeat was so comprehensive that its remains had to be collected with specialized equipment designed for handling exotic matter. The Berserker from the Crimson Nebula entered the arena with the kind of enthusiasm that came from a species that had evolved past the concept of self-preservation. Its combat style involved entering a trance state that increased physical capabilities while completely shutting down higher cognitive function. This approach had proven effective against every previous opponent, all of whom had possessed the courtesy to engage in straightforward combat rather than employing what appeared to be psychological warfare. The human strategy involved allowing the Berserker to exhaust itself against environmental obstacles while she remained safely out of reach. When the creature finally collapsed from overexertion, she approached with a medical kit she had somehow acquired from the arena's emergency supplies and began providing first aid. The crowd's reaction shifted from bloodthirsty enthusiasm to confused silence. Arena combat traditionally involved the complete destruction of all participants save one, not the implementation of emergency medical protocol. The human's decision to preserve her opponent's life violated several fundamental principles of entertainment violence and created a legal precedent that would require extensive revision of the arena's operating procedure. "She's treating the Berserker's wounds," Vex-9 reported to his supervisors with the tone of someone describing a physics experiment that had achieved impossible results. "The creature appears to be grateful." The Berserker, upon regaining consciousness, examined its carefully bandaged injuries with the kind of wonder typically reserved for religious experience. Its species had never encountered the concept of mercy in combat, and the experience appeared to have triggered a profound philosophical crisis. The creature bowed to the human with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious figures or particularly effective weapons dealers. The human's third opponent was a hive mind entity that communicated through pheromone releases and possessed the collective intelligence of several thousand individual organisms. Its combat strategy involved overwhelming opponents through sheer numbers and coordinated attacks that had proven effective against every previous challenger. The human's response involved chemical warfare of the most basic kind. She had somehow created a mixture that neutralized the entity's communication pheromones, rendering the hive mind incapable of coordinated action. The individual organisms wandered aimlessly around the arena floor, bumping into each other and displaying the kind of confusion typically associated with tourists in unfamiliar cities. Rather than eliminating the disoriented entities, the human began herding them toward the arena's exit with the patience of someone managing livestock. When the last organism had been safely removed from the combat zone, she sealed the exit and returned to the center of the arena floor. The crowd's reaction had evolved from anticipation to confusion to something approaching awe. The human had systematically defeated 4 of the galaxy's most dangerous combatants without actually killing any of them. Achievement that violated every principle of arena combat, while simultaneously demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that most civilizations hadn't achieved in millennia of evolution. Sir Klaxon's voice carried the weight of someone reporting a fundamental shift in the natural order. The remaining challengers have submitted a formal request for asylum. The arena's holding cells now contain several of the galaxy's most feared predators, all of whom had apparently decided that whatever legal consequences might result from refusing to fight were preferable to facing the human in combat. Their collective decision represented the first recorded instance of voluntary surrender in the arena's history. The human, unaware of the bureaucratic crisis her actions had precipitated, had begun implementing what could only be described as infrastructure improvement. She had somehow accessed the arena's maintenance systems and was making modifications that increased safety features while improving the functionality of various combat elements. Her work demonstrated an understanding of engineering principles that suggested either extensive technical training or the kind of intuitive grasp of complex systems that emerged from species that had spent their evolutionary history solving problems rather than simply applying violence to them. "She's optimizing the arena's operational efficiency," Vex-9 reported with the tone of someone whose career had just taken an unexpected turn toward the surreal. "The modifications will reduce maintenance costs by approximately 30%, while improving safety protocol. The human paused in her work to acknowledge the crowd's reaction, which had evolved from bloodthirsty cheering to respectful silence. She raised her hand in the same gesture she had used after defeating the Devourer, though this time it seemed less like a victory salute and more like an acknowledgement of responsibility. The arena floor, which had witnessed thousands of years of violence and destruction, had been transformed into something resembling a functional workspace. The humans' modifications had converted the killing ground into an environment that promoted survival and cooperation rather than mutual annihilation. Above, the observation deck buzzed with activity as administrators attempted to process the complete transformation of their premier entertainment venue. The human had not only survived the arena's challenges, but had somehow improved upon them, creating a system that served purposes beyond simple violence. The implications were staggering. If a single human could achieve such comprehensive dominance over the galaxy's most dangerous combat environment, what did this suggest about their species' potential contributions to galactic civilization? The human looked up at the observation deck and smiled again, the same expression she had worn when first entering the arena. This time, however, it carried the weight of someone who had not only survived the impossible, but had transformed it into something better. The arena had found its new champion, though champion seemed an inadequate term for someone who had fundamentally altered the nature of the competition itself. The arena's transformation from gladiatorial death trap to functional cooperative workspace had occurred with the kind of efficiency that typically required decades of bureaucratic planning and several committee meetings. The human had accomplished this feat in approximately 6 hours, armed with nothing more than an intuitive understanding of engineering principles and what appeared to be a complete disregard for the established order of things. The morning shift of arena personnel arrived to find their workplace utterly unrecognizable. Gone were the blood-stained sand pits and decorative bone collections. In their place stood a remarkably efficient training facility complete with safety protocols, organized equipment storage, and what appeared to be a rudimentary cafeteria. The human had somehow convinced the arena's food synthesis systems to produce nutritionally balanced meals for 17 different species, a feat that previous administrators had declared technically impossible. "She's established a mess hall," Claxon reported with the tone of someone describing a natural phenomenon that violated several laws of physics. "The combatants are socialized." The remaining challengers, rather than cowering in their cells awaiting inevitable doom, had begun gathering in the arena's central area for what could only be described as community meeting. The Berserker from the Crimson Nebula served as an unofficial translator, having learned basic communication protocols from several species during what it now referred to as recovery time. The crystalline entity had reformed itself into a more aesthetically pleasing configuration and was apparently sharing technical knowledge about molecular restructuring with anyone interested. The human moved through this unlikely assembly with the confidence of someone who had discovered that leadership involved solving problems rather than creating them. She had somehow acquired a tablet displaying the arena's operational statistics, and was making notes with the kind of focused attention typically reserved for final examination. "The efficiency metrics are unprecedented," X9 admitted to his increasingly frantic supervisors via emergency communication. "Injury rates have dropped by 97%, equipment maintenance costs have decreased by 60%, and somehow the combatants are requesting extended stays rather than immediate release." The bureaucratic implications were staggering. The arena's entire economic model depended on high turnover rates and spectacular casualty. The human's transformation of the facility into a functional community had eliminated the primary revenue streams while simultaneously creating unprecedented operational expenses in the form of creature comfort and educational programs. The galactic entertainment industry's reaction was swift and predictable. Emergency meetings convened across 12 star systems as executives attempted to determine how a single human had managed to completely subvert their most profitable venture. The arena's parent corporation faced the unprecedented challenge of explaining to shareholders why their premier death sport had become a cooperative learning environment. "We're receiving formal complaints from the Bloodsport Syndicate," Claxon reported, his mandibles clicking with stress. "They're claiming unfair competition and demanding regulatory intervention." The human's influence had spread beyond the arena floor itself. News of her achievements had reached the holding facilities where other acquired specimens awaited their turns in the combat zone. Rather than the traditional pre-death panic, these beings had begun organizing themselves into study groups and skill-sharing workshops. The prison complex had transformed into something resembling a multicultural university campus. The implications for galactic civilization were profound. If humans could achieve such comprehensive social transformation in the galaxy's most hostile environment, what might they accomplish in more conventional settings? Several academic institutions had quietly begun drafting research proposals to study human social dynamics, while a few progressive governments had started discussing the possibility of diplomatic relations with Earth. The humans' daily routine had settled into something resembling a cross between community organizer and facility manager. She conducted morning briefings with the various species, coordinated training exercises that emphasized cooperation over competition, and somehow maintained detailed records of everyone's progress and requirement. Her organizational skills had transformed the arena from a place of death into something approaching a functional society. She's implemented a merit-based advancement system, Vex-9 reported, with the resignation of someone whose career had been fundamentally altered by circumstances beyond his control. The combatants are earning privileges through constructive behavior rather than survival rate. The arena's weapon systems had been repurposed into training equipment. Environmental hazards had been converted into obstacle courses, and the automated defense systems now served as instructional aids for strategic thinking exercises. The human had somehow convinced the facility's artificial intelligence to adopt educational protocols rather than extermination procedures. The crowd's reaction had evolved from initial confusion to grudging admiration to something approaching reverence. Spectators who had come expecting blood and violence instead witnessed demonstrations of problem-solving, cooperation, and what appeared to be the emergence of genuine community among beings who had previously existed solely to destroy each other. Ticket sales have increased by 400%, Claxon noted with obvious bewilderment. The waiting list for arena admission now extends 18 months. The human's final modification to the arena involved the installation of what could only be described as a diplomatic chamber. The space featured communication equipment capable of real-time translation between hundreds of languages, comfortable seating for various anatomical configurations, and refreshment facilities that could accommodate the dietary requirements of most known species. The chamber's first official use involved a meeting between representatives from the Galactic Council and the human herself. The resulting conversation, which lasted approximately 3 hours, culminated in the unprecedented decision to classify the arena as a cultural exchange facility rather than an entertainment venue. The human's response to this designation was characteristic of her approach to most situations. She smiled, nodded politely, and returned to her work improving the facility's operational efficiency. She had somehow transformed the galaxy's most feared combat arena into its most successful integration center, without appearing to consider this achievement particularly remarkable. The final irony of the situation was not lost on Vex-9, who had spent his career managing the systematic destruction of various species only to witness their transformation into a functioning community under human leadership. His reports to the arena's parent corporation had evolved from routine casualty statistics to detailed analyses of unprecedented social dynamics. Sir, Claxon's voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the complete restructuring of fundamental assumptions about reality. The human has submitted a formal request for permanent resident status. The arena that had consumed thousands of beings now served as home to dozens of species who had discovered that cooperation yielded better results than competition. The human's transformation of the facility represented more than just improved management. It demonstrated that the galaxy's most dangerous environment could become its most productive when approached with intelligence, rather than violence. The beings who had once dismissed humans as soft and unremarkable now found themselves studying human social structures, with the kind of attention typically reserved for advanced physics. The species that had seemed so basic and unpromising had proven capable of achievements that surpassed the collective accomplishments of civilizations that had been exploring space for millennia. The arena's new reality served as a constant reminder that underestimating humans had been the galaxy's most spectacular miscalculation, and the humans' continued presence ensured that this lesson would not be forgotten anytime soon.